Heart of Steel thus far feels like the biggest departure from the types of stories we get in Batman the Animated Series, taking a much more retro sci-fi approach than the more grounded city crime in most episodes. Now, I'm not saying Batman the Animated Series is usually super realistic. This is clearly a heightened world where Batman can go out and fight crime without layers upon layers of armor. The city looks like it's stuck in the 40s, yet some modern technologies are more ubiquitous, and there's still plenty of really weird supervillains that could in no way exist in the real world. There's even a touch of science fiction in a few villains we've already seen, such as Poison Ivy with her chemical concoctions that can turn people to trees, or Scarecrow with his own fear toxin, or as recently as last episode with Hugo Strange's mind-reading machine. The key difference with Heart of Steel and most other episodes is that the science fiction element it plays with doesn't have much of a psychological basis that reflects on Batman. The supervillains usually reflect key aspects of Batman's personality, and the street crime or corruption he deals with harken back to the broken world that resulted in his parents' death. Heart of Steel's exploration of AI feels very far outside of that, placing Batman in a more traditional, or if I'm being uncharitable, a more generic superhero role of being the good guy that's there to stop all the robot madness. The concept of this two-parter doesn't feel suited to the kind of superhero Batman is, especially in this show. It's interesting to compare this to a much later episode that I hope to cover one day in Batman Beyond, called Lost Soul, which has a very science fiction concept at its core, with a dying man transferring his body to a computer. But the reason that episode works better as a story basis for a Batman show, besides the fact that Batman Beyond takes place in a highly advanced future, is that the concept is spun to be about reliance in one's own body and innate human ability, a theme that is prevalent in many Batman stories. After all, part of Batman's appeal is that he is a human being with human limitations, so Lost Soul forces Terry McGinnis to deal with relying on himself instead of gadgets to prove he's worthy of being Batman even without the Batsuit. You could say Heart of Steel is basically about the same thing, humanity overcoming cold technology, but it's lacking the sort of emotional anchor that is directly related to Batman or the idea of Batman. In Lost Soul, Terry has a clear desire to prove he is worthy of being Batman, and even the sequel to Heart of Steel, his Silicon Soul, does a better job of personalizing the science fiction by exploring almost the opposite side of the equation. Can the essence of Batman be replicated by a machine? But getting into this episode proper, the crux of the storyline involves a scientist named Carl Rossum, who after the death of his daughter created an AI named Hardak that infiltrates Wayne Enterprises and Gotham's government to replace humanity with robots. Hardak does this to avoid the sort of pain Rossum dealt with after the death of his family, eliminating the emotions it interprets as human frailty. This admittedly has lots of potential as a core concept that's related to Batman. After all, Batman can sometimes be cold or push himself too far because he wishes he didn't have to deal with the weaknesses of being a mortal man, so he can be more productive in his war on crime. But it's that very humanity that makes Batman a hero and able to fight crime in the first place without becoming a villain himself. But none of that is here. If anything, this is some of the most compassion I've ever seen him display when he's talking to Barbara Gordon, who I'll get into more in a sec. This also could have been an interesting place to deal with Batman's reliance on technology, though he doesn't use gadgets as much as other versions like in The Batman. The closest we get is the mechanical rig in the Batcave for his Batglider, which comes down to grab him for the Part 1 cliffhanger, which is, not a super exciting way to end an episode. After all, it's no surprise that Batman will be able to get out of the trap. I would have ended Part 1 with Gordon getting replaced, because at least that has a direct consequence on a character we're supposed to care about. So, Barbara Gordon. I really like Barbara Gordon in most things she pops up in. What's really appealing about her is that she has a drive to do good that is just innately a part of her. She doesn't have a tragic backstory, at least not at first. She's incredibly gifted and has a desire to use her abilities for the common good simply because that's the right thing to do. In many ways, she's the synthesis of the best parts of Batman and Commissioner Gordon. The costume, the mental and physical prowess evoke Batman, but the compassion and rock-solid morals are all Jim Gordon. It was a smart move to introduce us to Barbara before she becomes Batgirl. We get a sense that she's both smart and proactive when she almost immediately picks up that something is wrong with her father once he's replaced by a robot. She keeps asking questions and goes as far as to activate the bat signal out of the pure conviction that the man who looks like her father is not what he seems. I do wish she could have found some hard evidence before calling Batman so she has an argument besides her hunch, but surprisingly, Batman is fully willing to hear her out and investigate on her behalf without much conflict. I appreciate not starting Barbara's relationship to Batman with animosity, But what she's telling him is still a pretty far-fetched notion before he even has an inkling that something like robot replacements is even a possibility. Even so, I also really like that part 2 demonstrates that Barbara Gordon doesn't need a batsuit to be capable, such as when she uses the grapnel gun on the Bullock bot and breaks into Cybertron, yeah, they went with that name, all by herself. I question her getting the right password to the door on first try, since even though she was smart enough to use her makeup to uncover the fingerprints, those numbers could have still been pressed in multiple combinations, but that's really just a nitpick. Once again, I want to emphasize I love how proactive Barbara is, since my favorite moment with her is after they defeat the Bullock bot and she demands to follow along with Batman to rescue her father, and he just awkwardly asks her to let go of his cape before taking off. Getting back to the story in general, maybe the strangest thing about Heart of Steel is that the story, such as it is, doesn't have a strong enough through line to warrant 2 episodes, but at the same time, it flies by so quickly that it almost doesn't even feel like a two-parter. As I sat down to watch these episodes, by the time I got to the end of part 2, my reaction was, that's it? Already? Part of that has to do with the fact that the end is rushing hard to wrap everything up. Hardex sets the plan into motion, building explodes, the end, credits. But it has more to do with the simple fact that these episodes are pretty entertaining. Especially with how nuts part 2 gets with Batman destroying a bunch of robots. Sarah Connor would be proud. Speaking of Terminator, it's clear that those films had a huge influence on these episodes, especially whenever one of the robot duplicates gets their skin torn away. Anyway, part 1 is mostly set up involving corporate espionage and stealing these microchips from Wayne Enterprises, which ends up being a bunch of fluff considering that all it's really leading to is a bunch of outlandish action, but even the very opening has plenty of entertainment factor. We're thrown for a loop as we see something completely unlike anything in the show before, with a briefcase robot breaking into the Wayne offices. This immediately gives both episodes a whole new and pretty wacky vibe that this show doesn't normally offer. Not that I'd want many more episodes to be like this one, but it's a nice change of pace and more exciting than Night of the Ninja and Cat Scratch Fever. Part 1 also introduces us to Randa Duane, supposedly Russell's assistant, but actually she's another robot duplicate created by Hardak, which isn't surprising based on how we see her communicate directly with Hardak, and Commissioner Gordon's abduction reveals to the audience that there is such a thing as robot duplicates. Duane is given a fair amount of screen time, but unfortunately she's nothing more than Hardak's henchperson. So besides the fact that she's a gorgeous blonde woman, probably in a feeble attempt to have some sexual tension with Bruce, she really is no different than the other robot duplicates Hardak has at its disposal. Yet the episode seems to tout her up as a key player in the story, which I suppose she kind of is from a plot perspective, but she's not a distinct character in her own right. There's also the plot point of her finding the Batcave and thus finding out Bruce Wayne is Batman, which should be a pretty big deal, but Hardak simply says this is information that may prove useful later. That's it. There's no payoff to it by the end, and the uncovering of the secret still doesn't play a significant role outside of another Batcave infiltration in his Silicon Soul. Maybe playing with a potential reveal of Batman's secret identity would have necessitated an ongoing story arc, which this series simply does not do, but as it is, it feels pointless. The only purpose this plot point serves is to make the Batcave go haywire so we can have that part 1 cliffhanger. This could have been written in a way where Dwayne doesn't discover Batman's secret identity, and it would make no difference. Touching a bit more on Hardak, the thing I find most interesting and subversive about him is that he makes a point of not killing the people being replaced. Now, this could be hand-waved with a more cynical rationale like, it's just an obvious convenience, or this is a kid's show, so they wouldn't go that far, but I genuinely like Hardak's justification that there is still more he can learn from humans. Too often in these AI machines take over the world storyline, the machines think themselves automatically superior to human beings, so they are either slaughtered or used as slave labor, or both. Hardak may view human emotions like grief as weakness, but its motivation is more nuanced in that it wants to eliminate that weakness and maximize that which is strong and efficient in humankind. Therefore, it makes sense that Barbara's very human love for her father is instrumental in Batman uncovering Hardak's plot and defeating it in the end. Now, that being said, there is some juicy thematic potential in comparing Hardak's maker, Russell, with Jim Gordon's relationship with his daughter that isn't explored whatsoever. After all, it's the death of Russell's own daughter that sets everything in motion, and yet there's never a scene of Gordon confronting Russell, maybe chastising him for the terror he's created, or expressing a certain degree of understanding because Gordon can't imagine what he'd do if anything happened to Barbara, which, hey, we kind of see later on in Over the Edge. Instead, all we get is practically a throwaway line in the aftermath between Russell and Mayor Hill, where Russell expresses guilt over what has happened. I do, however, appreciate that Heart of Steel makes a solid effort in having me believe in Gordon's relationship to his daughter and how warm it is, not too dissimilar to the warmth Alfred has towards Bruce. The scene that introduces us to Barbara and Whoopi the teddy bear gets this across very efficiently by having Gordon blush about bringing Barbara the bear, and with the awkward beat of Gordon re-entering the room to get Whoopi back from Bruce. Of course, this is done mostly to set up the contrast of when Gordon Bot enters the picture and just tosses Whoopi aside, but these moments impressively also get across the idea that Gordon still sees Barbara as his little girl without infantilizing her or ignoring her accomplishments as a young woman, seeing as how he beams with pride when he tells Bruce that she's made the Dean's List. Quick note. I may be reading way too far into this, but I find it interesting that there is a potential toy motif with Whoopi, and Alfred remarking that Bruce shouldn't play so rough with his toys in reference to his bat gadgets, that can contribute to the audience equating Gordon and Alfred as good father figures, which in turn parallels Bruce and Barbara in that these father figures have molded them into exceptional people. I actually quite like the decision to have Barbara keep Whoopi around, at least in this first incarnation of the series. It tells the audience that she's effeminate and that that is in no way equated with weakness or contradicts how capable she is or her potential to help Batman in the field as Batgirl. Barbara comes across as a realistic female character, not a female character who is written pretty much exactly like a man. Very much looking forward to when we run into her again in I Am the Night and the Shadow of the Bat two-parter. That's pretty much all I got about Heart of Steel's story, so we can talk a bit about animation. Though I wish they would draw Batman a bit closer to his character model, Sunrise Studios definitely brings the visuals a step up from the last two episodes. For reference, Sunrise provided the animation for episodes like Pretty Poison and The Cat and the Claw Part 1, so their work is quite solid. I think where they excel most is drawing what are meant to be gorgeous female characters. Much like Poison Ivy, there's a fluidity and elegance to Randa Duane's movement that really conveys the sexy femme fatale archetype. Sunrise do both episodes, which I think may be a rarity when it comes to two-parters, and it seems like Part 2 has the more animation-intensive sequences because of how much robot fighting action there is. It's genuinely unnerving how mechanical the movement and poses are for the robot duplicates, making it clear for the audience that these are not the human characters without needing to pick up on it through the dialogue. The robot designs in general feel very throwbacky, especially the smaller bots Rossum has made, bringing to mind things like Metropolis, the film, and the Jetsons, which is very appropriate since Batman the Animated Series in general is going for the 1940s Art Deco aesthetic. Also, lots of stuff blows up at the end of Part 2, and I'm happy to say that the explosions look quite good, especially when the robot duplicates get blasted and you end up seeing their half-human, half-mechanical carcass. Sunrise is very good at giving combat a distinct impact, so when Batman gets thrown around by Bullockbot, it looks pretty brutal. The one moment in Part 2 that stuck out to me as iffy is when Barbara and Batman stand over the remains of Bullockbot. It looks awkward and stiff when Batman's doing the Superman-esque hands on the hips as he weirdly keeps kicking around the mechanical pieces while talking to Barbara. Also, despite all the action in Part 2, it's actually Part 1 that has my favorite visual in the whole story. When Briefcase Bot is running through Wayne Enterprises and then an elevator opens up to dramatically reveal Batman is awesome. I'm not an animation expert, so I'm not exactly sure how to phrase it. Maybe someone in the comments can help me out. But Batman seems to be just a still element, like the background, which makes him look super detailed with really dramatic lighting. It's a very fun way to introduce our hero, and I love the close-up on his face after we see the full body shot. Reminds me a lot of the series' title sequence after he lands on the roof and he just glares at the two criminals. When it comes to signature bat gadgets from this show, Heart of Steel does indeed bring back the Backlighter, which I believe we haven't seen since Cat in the Claw, though you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Either way, it's very neat, especially since it's pitch black and contrasts incredibly well when there's any kind of light source in the sky backgrounds, so we can see the bat shape clearly. Overall, I'd definitely say the animation here can back up the action-heavy storyline. We do have some new voice actors to talk about. First up, we've got William Sanderson as Dr. Rossum, who's been in a hell of a lot of stuff, probably most recognizably as J.F. Sebastian in Blade Runner. It's no surprise the producers thought of him when casting Rossum, since his character in Blade Runner also makes mechanical dolls. He brings a very old-fashioned southern feel to the character that lines up pretty well with the very retro designs of his robots. We've also got Leslie Easterbrook as Randa Duane, who I didn't know until now also played Mala in Superman the Animated Series. Mala. Hmm, wow. Just realized how on the nose that name is. Anyway, Easterbrook is fine, no complaints. It's just that Dwayne's got nothing interesting going on. Next is Jeff Bennett as Hardak. He's an extremely prolific voice actor who you might recognize as Dexter's dad in Dexter's Laboratory, or Johnny Bravo himself, and has gone on to do plenty of voice work for other DC animated projects, such as voicing the Joker in Batman Brave and the Bold, and Red Tornado in Young Justice. Even in this very show, he'll return to voice Jack Ryder, aka the Creeper, which we'll hopefully get to eventually. As Hardak, his voice is suitably cold and monotone, but I appreciate he brings hints of emotion to the voice, especially towards the end of Part 2 when Batman is wrecking everything. The most important new voice actor we have here is Melissa Gilbert as Barbara Gordon. She does a good job. I especially buy that she sounds her age. Very youthful, but there's also this tomboyish quality to her voice that gives the character some spunk. Not to take anything away from Gilbert's performance, but ultimately I am okay with the fact that she was recast in the New Adventures season because Tara Strong ends up being the definitive Batgirl voice in my head. Still, Gilbert does a fine job and is very much up to the caliber of the rest of the recurring cast. Unfortunately, I don't have much to comment on with the score this time around. The title card theme for both episodes is suitably ominous and foreboding, but not all that noteworthy compared to some of the other themes in the series. So, Heart of Steel overall is entertaining enough and a solid introduction to Barbara Gordon, but it lacks a truly resonant core that would make viewers come back to these couple episodes again and again. If you really want to see Batman fight robots, well, Part 2 will really be the one that gets the job done, but otherwise there isn't much of interest here. I give Heart of Steel a 3.5 out of 5. Glad we got to tackle another two-part episode. Next time around, we've actually got a pretty significant one. Our introduction to yet another extremely iconic Batman character, the Riddler in If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich? It feels strange that it's taken so long to get to him, but it should be very interesting. I'm definitely looking forward to it. Thanks for tuning in again, everyone, and I'll see ya next time.